In the quiet hours of October 4, 1997, in Charlotte, North Carolina, an armored car company employee named David Ghantt loaded $17.3 million in cash into a company van and drove away. At the time, it was the second largest cash robbery on American soil. Behind this incredible heist was not a team of professional criminals or a sophisticated gang, but a group of ordinary people with extraordinary greed. Their story would include lavish spending, unbelievable mistakes, an international manhunt, and eventually, capture. This is the story of what the FBI called the Hillbilly Heist, a crime so outlandish that Hollywood would later turn it into a comedy film. David Ghantt was 27 years old when he began working as a vault supervisor for Loomis Fargo and Company in Charlotte. With a military background and a quiet demeanor, he wasn't the type of person anyone would expect to become one of America's most notorious vault robbers. But Gantt's life took a dramatic turn when he met Kelly Campbell, a fellow Loomis Fargo employee. Though Ghantt was married, he became infatuated with Campbell. After Campbell left the company, they maintained contact, and their relationship would become the catalyst for one of the most bizarre heists in American history. Campbell introduced Ghantt to her friend Steve Chambers, a small-time criminal with big ambitions. Chambers saw an opportunity in Ghantt, a man with access to millions of dollars and a weakness that could be exploited. With Campbell acting as the connection between them, Chambers began to plant the idea of a heist in Gantt's mind. The plan they developed was simple in concept but bold in execution. Ghantt would rob the Loomis Fargo vault where he worked, flee to Mexico with a small portion of the money, and wait for Campbell and Chambers to join him once the investigation cooled down. They would then enjoy their newfound wealth together. What Ghantt didn't know was that Chambers had no intention of sharing the fortune. His real plan was to use Ghantt as the fall guy, keeping most of the money for himself while Ghantt hid in a foreign country. Throughout the summer of 1997, the trio refined their plan. Chambers researched how to move large sums of money without alerting authorities. Campbell maintained her role as the go-between, and Ghantt gathered critical information about the vault's security systems and company protocols. The vault at Loomis Fargo's Charlotte facility contained millions of dollars on any given day. The money was in transit, collected from banks and businesses before being counted, sorted, and shipped to the Federal Reserve. Security was tight, with cameras, alarms, and strict access controls. But there was one vulnerability in the system. Trusted employees like Ghantt had access to the vault, and company policy allowed certain employees to work alone in the vault area after hours. The conspirators decided that Ghantt would strike on a Saturday evening when he was scheduled to work alone. He would disable the cameras, load as much money as possible into a company vehicle, drive it to a nearby warehouse where Chambers and others would be waiting, and then head straight to the airport to catch a flight to Mexico. Chambers promised to wire money to Ghantt while he laid low in Mexico. After a few months, when the investigation had presumably cooled down, Campbell would join Ghantt south of the border. Then, they would all reunite and enjoy their millions. It was a plan full of holes, but to three amateur criminals blinded by the prospect of instant wealth, it seemed foolproof. October 4, 1997 was an ordinary Saturday at the Loomis Fargo facility in Charlotte. As evening approached, employees finished their shifts and headed home for the weekend. All except David Ghantt, who volunteered to stay late. At approximately 6 p.m., Ghantt sent the last remaining employee home, leaving him alone in the facility. With no one watching, he moved quickly. First, he disabled the security cameras by removing the videotapes. Then, he entered the vault and began loading cash into boxes and then into a company van parked at the loading dock. For the next 2 hours, Ghantt worked alone, carrying stacks of bills from the vault to the vehicle. The amount of cash was overwhelming, far more than they had anticipated. Ghantt filled the van with over $17.3 million in cash. The money was so heavy and voluminous that he couldn't take it all. He left behind another $3 million because there simply wasn't room. At around 8 p.m., Ghantt locked the facility and drove the van to a pre-arranged location, a warehouse rented by Chambers under a false name. There, Chambers and several associates were waiting. They quickly transferred the money from the van to another vehicle. Ghantt took only $50,000 with him, as per the plan, and headed to the airport, where he caught a flight to Mexico. Chambers and his crew took the remaining $17.25 million and disappeared into the night. By the time the theft was discovered on Monday morning, Ghantt was in Mexico, and the money was hidden in various locations around Charlotte. The second largest cash robbery in U.S. history had been committed, and not a single alarm had been triggered. The discovery of the heist on Monday morning set off immediate alarm bells throughout law enforcement. The FBI quickly took charge of the investigation, and it didn't take long for them to identify Ghantt as their primary suspect. The surveillance tapes were missing, but Gantt's access card had been used to enter the building. He was nowhere to be found, hadn't reported to work, and wasn't answering calls. Within hours, investigators were at his house, questioning his wife. Meanwhile, Steve Chambers wasted no time enjoying his newfound wealth. Despite the FBI's active investigation, Chambers and his wife, Michelle, moved from their modest apartment to a $635,000 mansion in an exclusive neighborhood. They bought new luxury vehicles, expensive jewelry, and designer clothes. Michelle Chambers received a breast augmentation, and Steve flashed a new Rolex watch. Their sudden lavish lifestyle raised eyebrows among their new neighbors. One neighbor reportedly said they were like the Beverly Hillbillies, referring to the 1960s TV show about a poor family that suddenly strikes it rich and moves to Beverly Hills. The challenge for Chambers and his accomplices was figuring out how to handle so much cash. Most of the stolen money was in small bills, 5s, 10s, and 20s. The total haul weighed over 2,000 pounds. They couldn't deposit it in banks without raising suspicion, so they stored it in unusual places, closets, suitcases, and even buried in one accomplice's backyard. Despite their attempts at discretion, their spending habits made them conspicuous. They used cash for everything, including their mansion's down payment. They bought a business, a salon, to help launder the money. But they had no experience with money laundering, and their attempts were clumsy and obvious. Back in Mexico, Ghantt was living in fear. He received occasional wire transfers from Chambers, but far less money than promised. He moved between hotels, growing increasingly paranoid. Unknown to Ghantt, Chambers wasn't planning a reunion. Instead, he had discussed having Ghantt killed to eliminate any possibility that he might return and expose their operation. The FBI labeled the case Operation Rip Fence and assigned dozens of agents to track down Ghantt and recover the stolen money. They quickly discovered the connection between Ghantt and Kelly Campbell, and through her, linked Steve Chambers to the crime. The investigators were aided by the criminals' own mistakes. First, they identified calls from Chambers to Campbell and from Campbell to Ghantt before the heist. Then, they found calls from Chambers to Mexico after Ghantt had fled there. But the most damning evidence came from the suspects themselves. Their extravagant spending created a trail that was easy to follow. The FBI monitored Chambers' phone calls and discovered that he was planning to have Ghantt killed rather than share the money with him. In January 1998, just 3 months after the heist, the FBI arrested Campbell and Chambers, along with several accomplices. Chambers was found with over $800,000 in cash hidden in his home. Agents eventually recovered approximately $13 million of the stolen money, with the rest presumably spent by the conspirators. To capture Ghantt, the FBI worked with Mexican authorities to track him down in Cozumel, where he was arrested in March 1998. He was extradited back to the United States to face charges. In all, 24 people were indicted for their roles in the heist or for helping to hide and launder the money. Most of the key players accepted plea deals in exchange for lighter sentences. David Scott Ghantt pleaded guilty to bank larceny and was sentenced to 7 years and 8 months in federal prison. With good behavior, he was released in 2005 after serving about 7 years. Steve Chambers also pleaded guilty and received an 11-year sentence. His wife Michelle was sentenced to 5 years. Kelly Campbell served 5 years and 2 months for her role in the heist. The other accomplices received various sentences depending on their level of involvement. Some received probation, while others served several years in prison. After his release, Ghantt attempted to rebuild his life. In interviews, he has expressed regret for his actions, acknowledging that he was blinded by infatuation and greed. He has worked various jobs, including as a construction worker, and has maintained a low profile. The Loomis Fargo heist is a real example of how greed can lead to serious consequences. The people involved had millions of dollars in their hands but lost everything because of their own mistakes and betrayals. In the end, none of them kept the money, and all of them faced heavy punishment for what they did.